Hey, what's going on, everyone? And welcome to another episode of Ask A Brotha Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff St. James, and welcome to today's topic. I believe this is episode 8, titled I Hate White People. Before we jump underway, I'm just going to make a couple quick announcements. So, number one, shout out to all of the subscribers that we have. As of today, we are now at 25,603 subscribers since I last checked. One, kudos to you all. Appreciate y'all for just showing love, showing support, watching and engaging with the content as we try to become more consistent with getting this stuff out, as we ever push towards being able to become fully independent and be able to do this at a full-time way. The only way that we'll get there is obviously by your financial support and donations. So whenever you see these type of original content pieces and or interviews, feel free to show love and donate $2, $3 if you can. And one of the ways to do that is by clicking the $ that you see next to the comment section. I believe there's definitely been some people, and I shout out to all of you who've just actually gone on the bio section of the channel and just saw ways to donate via PayPal, Cash App. Appreciate it. Once we're just getting one step closer to being able to move this channel to be able to be something I hope I can envision it turning it into. A couple quick announcements before we jump into today's topic. Number one, store merchandise updates. We are getting ready to order our own supplies that we've had of the stuff created just to kind of test it out and see more or less if we like the quality before we kind of offer it first to our members, as far as both gifts and rewards for those who have been the most consistent and engaged, and then eventually opening it up to the general public as well. So remember that members are going to be the first ones that's notified about that, as well as our first men's virtual self-improvement group. We have the outline, we have the agenda, we now have the pictures, and now I just need to test out the link to make sure it is good to go. So once that is good to go, both of those will be put out there first to our members with a members only video. And then obviously we'll therefore let everyone else know at a later date that both of those things, as far as being able to join into one of these men's virtual self-improvement groups, as well as the merchandise and where to get it and find it, the members will get first dibs on that first. So now that that's underway, we'll set that aside, and now we'll jump to the main thing of why it is I believe you and, well, all of you may have clicked on this. Do I hate white people? I have been recently reflecting on, the past few episodes, reactions, and responses from each group that I've kind of focused on and gave or offered a potential perspective, viewpoint, or even criticism of something that I think is either wrong, maybe a potential blind spot, or even something that we just flat out need to do better with. So when I offered a critique of women, the common reaction and response was, well, he hates women. When I had critiqued the Black community, often what I had read and heard and was told is that, oh, you hate yourself, or he hates himself and he's a sellout. When I offered a critique of things that I think men were doing wrong or needing to improve on, I was accused of pandering to women. When I offered a critique of the mental health field and even some influencers that are operating as life coaches and mental health experts when they're probably not, it was called into question and doubts about my own qualifications. When I offered a critique of the Democrat Party, this is where it gets good. I remember being called Uncle Tom, wanting to be accepted by conservatives and the right and white people. That apparently those were all the groups that I wanted to be accepted by. And then recently, when I offered a critique of Charlie Kirk and conservative talking points or strategies often utilized during debates and argumentation, and even outlining and pointing out some of their areas of potential hypocrisy, was called ignorant, unaware of context, that I should stay in my lane, and that I didn't know about Charlie until after he passed, and that apparently I am a covert racist that is against white people. Similar responses to each of these claims, I've decided that I think now is a really, really good time to kind of talk directly to white people and those watching my content both across the country and the world as well. So feel free to share this with every white person and even every non-white person that you know or even are related to. And now, even before we delve into the topic of whether or not I hate white people, there are 3 points that I would like to offer that I believe may be worth reflecting on. Number one, and you've heard similar questions, and I just want you to analyze it through the lens of me discussing this piece, this topic. Is it possible to disagree and not assume someone that disagrees with your claims, your arguments, and your views is automatically ignorant, dumb, and hateful? I only ask because that has often been the accusation of what many on the left, Democrats, feminists, liberals, progressives, if you will, that's often the side, at least the accusation is that tends to be the side that when hearing or presented with alternative ideas and opinions about socially accepted views that counter their own ideological camps, often it's been the accusation that typically, when someone is likely to immediately react and say, well, they're ignorant, they're stupid, or they're hateful, that's often been attributed to people on the left. So again, is it possible to disagree and not assume someone that disagrees with your claims, your arguments, or your views is automatically ignorant and dumb and hateful? Point of reflection number 2. Is it possible for someone to point out unflattering things, views, and concerns of potential harm, bias, and potential blind spots and not be instantly seen as wrong or cowardly if they do so about the very group you identify with or are a part of? And is that the standard you have held for those within your camp, stating what you believe to be true about other groups that you don't identify with racially, politically, and even ideologically? Or is it only fine when someone you agree with offers criticism towards those you disagree with? That point number 2, I think, is very relevant now, especially in light of most recent events, which I'll touch on in a little bit. And then point number 3, were you recently tempted to react and do the very thing you so easily can identify other groups doing when presented with new information, different perspectives, and views? Announcing you are now going to leave this page and content after hearing a view about, let's say, Charlie Kirk or conservatives, when you were fine with staying, following, listening, and engaging when the topic of focus was on feminism or on the Black community, or pointing out normalized misandry and just outright hatred towards men, or even my criticisms of wokeness, or even just the horrible policies embedded within the Democratic strategy right now. You were fine with staying. You were fine with listening. And now I wonder, with those who have announced that they are now leaving and this isn't what they came here for, is and can it only be true if you believe it as such? Have you attached your identity to a person, political party, or political ideology, so much so that when you hear or see any critique, you react and respond as if it is a personal attack? The reason why I pose these questions / statements / points of reflection is because when you try to tackle really, really tough topics like I have been doing, whether it's relating to women and their behavior, men and their behavior, Democrats, you name it, whatever it is that I've been bringing up, all of these are functionally somewhat tough and difficult to kind of navigate through. And it seems that many of the people that have most appreciated this channel, being open, thinking differently, you tended to rock with me when you agreed. But once we got to a subject or topic that you really, really identified with, have you been tempted to react and respond and make the same conclusions that those who you don't agree with, you believe, tend to do with the whole emotion or feelings over facts versus facts over feelings? So today, will be another thought experiment, and it will challenge many of you. And I will, go over both my personal experiences, some general observations, before answering the question of, do I hate white people? No, my history that I'm going to cover, it won't be in chronological order. It will just be random things that kind of came to mind as I kind of prepped for this episode, and then we'll see where that kind of takes us and brings us to. So for one, when I think about race in America, one of my most interesting, memorable moments had to be by far the day that Senator Barack Obama got elected the first time on election night and won the presidency. I was hanging out at a friend's house with a group of friends, and for us, all happened to be Black, of course. We were high school friends. We all hung out. This is, shortly after high school for us. And we watched, and we just were so excited. We were excited to see history be made and be able to see it in our lifetime, something that we never assumed we may ever see, which is someone that looked like us, that was younger, and apparently was running on policies that made it seem as though potentially, since maybe JFK, we finally got somebody in there who actually sees us and all of us and wants to represent the people. At the time, anyway, that's what I think a lot of us had concluded. And it was awesome to be, in our minds at the time, like really excited about history being made. And, at the same time while that was happening, I was going to a PWI, a private institution, predominantly white institution, college-wise. And because it was private, it was religious, the reactions and responses and many of the statements that were being made, both by the students and many of the faculty, you can only imagine in a private, religious, fairly conservative institution. I mean, you could obviously imagine what was being said at that time back then. It wasn't really the greatest. I just remember a lot of references to him being the Antichrist. And even the school itself, I remember we had a diversity day. And I can probably find and pull up 20 classmates, 20 peers who at the same time I was there. I remember diversity day like it was yesterday. And while at this same school, while I'm hearing a lot of the things that were being made and stated about Barack Obama, I remember with Diversity Day, and it was like a big cultural thing, and all these different groups were being asked to bring their favorite dishes and have these different dishes kind of represent different groups. And when it came time for my community, each group had their unique dishes and different stuff that was either catered or brought in. And then when it came to us, what specifically was brought in place as a display, as a representation for my community, was fried chicken and watermelon. Now, I enjoy both, so I'm not going to be one of these uppity people who tries to act like both those foods aren't good. But I shouldn't have been surprised when I saw the visceral reaction at times with what was said, how it was stated, what many of the students that look like me often felt and experienced, and what they stated, what their experiences were. And I vividly remember a lot of students kind of being in an uproar and actually going to, I believe, the dean and potentially the president to kind of go off about why the hell something like this would happen. And in hindsight, thinking about the dirty looks, thinking about the attempts to call the president at the time, or president-elect at the time, the Antichrist, that was unfortunately not some of my earliest experiences around white people who at times may, just not been the most culturally competent or aware about some of the ways in which I think their words and behaviors could be interpreted. But, there's other things that I've kind of observed and experienced as well. Like as an example, when I was, I believe, 16 going on 17, I was getting ready to cross Route 130 to go into Willingboro, New Jersey, to head and ride my bike over to soccer practice for school. And there was no bike lane, and the cars were driving fairly close to the curb. So I decided to just ride my bike on the curb because no one was there on it for a while. And then there was a older white gentleman who was there, and he, for lack of a better word, he said something to me as I kind of got off the trail or got off the sidewalk and rode around him. And I kind of slowed down and stopped and turned back and said, hey, what, did you say something to me? And he said, you're not supposed to be riding your bike on the sidewalk. And I said, hey, I get it. I understand, but there's no bike lane. The cars are very close. So I'm going to ride on the sidewalk. He decided to say, and I quote, don't you talk back to me, you N-word, or I'll have you hung right now. Of course, there'll be the occasional people who, either don't believe me or think that I made it up, or why didn't you do this or do that as a 16-year-old? But, words were exchanged, and I, just turned and got on my bike and just continued on and got to practice and told all my teammates about it, which was crazy for them. But, it happened. First and only time that I can recall being threatened in that way in regards to being hung. And it just so happened to be an older white man that said it. I think about, previous instances with, like, let's say some previous coworkers that would take offense to some of my political posts or statements about the need to decentralize the views and opinions of non-Black people, which includes white people as well, from our own thoughts and feelings about ourselves and our own culture. And I think a lot about, I think it was Dr. Clark, the experiment with the Black versus white dolls. For those who kind of looked into it, that there was, when this experiment was done, they were finding that very, very young school-age children were functionally propagandized and indoctrinated to believe that the white doll that they were holding and trying to play with or see was the good doll, and that the Black doll, something was wrong or that it was bad. And then I think as we get older, many Black Americans and even I was thinking in various different groups, I think sometimes we can kind of elevate the views, opinions, and perspectives of people outside of our community and outside of ourselves versus actually being much more exploratory and interested in what is it that we think of ourselves in terms of what is it we need to improve on. And then seeing people have this visceral reaction, white people, white female people specifically, former coworkers who would struggle with hearing that their opinion should be secondary, if at all even acknowledged, when it comes to our own opinions about ourselves. They seem to have an issue, a strong issue with that. I remember when I was working at one of these institutions at one point in Mount Holly, New Jersey, actually, and I was doing case management work, and I would travel, to different homes to meet with the children, get updates from the parents, make sure that they're linking with services, and nice little suburban area, a community and neighborhood in Mount Holly, and was parked as I was getting my paperwork together, writing out my notes just to kind of prep and get stuff in order. White gentleman walked up, knocked on the glass and said, hey, are you from around here? I said, no. And he said, so, what are you here for? And I said, work. And this is probably over 10, 12 years ago at this point. But he said, well, I'm only checking in, man, because we had a series of break-ins and we're just trying to make sure everyone that's here is supposed to be here, and just want to make you aware that, like, I'm friends with some of the police in the area, including the sheriff. And, I know him personally. And I'm like, okay, thanks for the information. Now, mind you, context, this was probably about 12 to 2 in the afternoon. Was wearing something very similar to what I'm wearing right now. I might have even been wearing a tie at that point. Broad daylight, dressed up, clearly have work stuff with me. And this gentleman is kind of, somewhat being, scrutinizing what I'm here for, being a little suspicious, questioning me of why I'm here or whether I belong here. And, I kind of left it at that. I got out the car and walked to the house on the block across the street from where I had parked, knocked on the door and came inside with the couple and their child who had welcomed me in. And it was an African couple. And I'd asked them and said, hey, did you guys hear about this like string of break-ins around the house? I mean, around the neighborhood and everything. This guy just was clocking me and trying to make sure, I'm who I say I'm supposed to be. And they said, what break-in? They said, this has been very quiet and peaceful around here for as long as we've been here. remember while in South Philly a few years ago, standing across, this was in the heat of the whole statues being replaced thing. I remember kind of standing out in South Philly, just watching and observing and taking note of the protests, the supporters that wanted the statue to stay, and the supporters of those that wanted it to come down, and seeing what the police and different political figures that were out there were stating, and just kind of watching and observing. And slowly I started to realize that the group that lived out there that was in support of the statue staying was getting larger and larger than the very small group of people like myself who personally didn't care, but just happened to be out there just observing and seeing that they were starting to make a lot of statements about, y'all need to leave, you don't belong here. Now, it was a public space, obviously, but the greater thing was how things started to shift, where some of the white males who were very angry with our presence even being there would yell slurs, throw water at us, and threaten us. Luckily, we were able to get out of there. But again, just happened to be white males. And in general, thinking about my experience both in ministry, with church, work, and realizing the countless people, white people, white men and white women who, when they didn't like a particular political viewpoint, when they didn't like my stance on something, when they weren't a big fan of my criticisms of a particular political party, police misconduct, government overreach, the role of faith in church in these areas, and how it relates to how race is being shown or expressed or responded to in America, they would countlessly try to get me removed from jobs and positions and roles and jobs in ministry. It was very, very interesting thing. But I noted oftentimes when this happened, they just so happened to be white. Working in Philly, and this is, I'm sure, is the case with many other urban cities and spaces where just this countless number of times that you can recall, and people you've worked with or people you've lived around stating when they've called the police, even if it was an actual emergency, which is usually why we're calling, they didn't always come. And in hindsight, when I look at the other areas that I've worked in, the other areas that I've lived in that were far nicer, quieter, police always came. I just thought that was interesting. And I always wondered if in other areas that didn't look like the groups that I was from or worked in, I just wondered, would the response from the dispatchers and the response from the police have been slightly different? I don't know. I just know that that's been my general experience in a predominantly Black space in an urban city in North Philly. A few more. This whole thing and I've experienced this a few times, man, this whole thing of like making it known how drastically different they saw me in contrast to the stereotypes of those within the Black community, considering how rare they felt I and people that acted like me were in regards to the Black community. And I always wondered, how many Black people do they actually know if they think that I'm rare, really rare? I don't know. And just the whole concept of that feeling of they're just almost insinuating you're one of the good ones. And knowing that I don't think I've ever in the history of my life met a white person and be like, you know what, you are the exact opposite of what's wrong with white culture and white people. You are a great, excellent example. Good job. That just, it's such a weird thing. People can't just say, man, I love your speech, or I love your content. It's wow, I don't know. It's just a very strange thing. And I don't know how much of it is on me with stuff like that as it is the idea of at times you're being talked to and talked about as if you are seen as a representative for a whole group, whereas those that don't get talked to that way are allowed to be seen as individuals. I'll touch on that a little bit. And to kind of wrap things up in terms of my past, definitely went through a period of time when I was in my last relationship, which was an interracial relationship at that. And just the judgment, the dirty looks, the comments, the reference or use of an N-word when me and my significant other at that time would walk past people. Some of the people who judged us and did use the N-word just, again, happened to be white. And these last two, because they kind of are some of the ones that kind of stuck to me the most. I definitely remember hanging out with one of my friends, childhood friends. We were older. We were adults at this point. We had gone to the 7-Eleven that was near us at the time, and we had frequented this 7-Eleven for years, in fact. And, just observing, just seeing him being accused in front of me of stealing when it's like we've been in here for like 10 seconds. And because we didn't find what we were looking for as we're walking out, we're now being instantly accused. Now, most will say, oh, that's just an honest mistake. But if your experience has been, which has been the case for him and I and many people that just happens to look like me, is that when we would enter into these spaces and enter into these stores, oftentimes we would be followed, but not even often asked if we need help with anything or how could they help us. And then when other people would walk in, customers, people who clearly look like they didn't work there, and especially and particularly if they just so happen to be white, I would note that a lot of the staff and employees that would have no problem watching me and watching a lot of people that look like me, I would note and observe and see their lack of follow through to watch and follow the white customer. Strange. Just happened to observe it again. And then lastly, probably the one that sticks out to me the most, despite all the different examples I've kind of given you in terms of interactions and observations, just on a personal level that I've seen directly. And of course there's a lot more, but these are just key ones that kind of stood out to me. The last one, and this is the key one. Remember going to a swimming pool at a motel in Jersey. Late teenager, I can't remember exactly if I was 15, 16 at that point, and I'd gone with my mother and my younger sister. And I observed as we had got to the motel, it was just a day trip type thing, and we got our swimming stuff and went out back to go to the pool area, and we had saw different groups. Clearly, they weren't all talking to each other. Clearly, they weren't all interacting with each other. They were just located in different sections of the pool, and they all just happened to be white. And within about 60 seconds from my sister and I walking and entering into that space and getting into the pool, the entire pool area was cleared out. Probably a solid 12 to 15 people, some children, some adults. But we could tell that this group of people weren't all together. They were in different sections. They were minding their business. But when we came, it just so happened that within 1 minute, we had the entire pool to ourselves. Now, people can come up with a whole host of explanations for that. But again, it just so happened to be that I happened to look like this, black, and they all were white. So those are my general experiences, more or less. Of course, there's been some others, but, for whatever reason, whether just time or, whatever. I think you get the gist that I've had some not so good experiences when it's come to, white people. General observations. I think for me, and I think this is the case for a lot of people who think like me anyway, one of the things that we do note and observe in general when it comes to thinking about and reflecting on the identity of whiteness, one of those things that we've noted, and we see it a lot on Fox News and on social media, and even when in certain conversations, we've noted almost like this very insistent need to have the man seen as God in the flesh, i.e. Jesus in terms of Christianity, or Jesus or Yahshua, whatever you want to call him, this incessant need for him to look like someone from the white community, when we all know 99% confident that he looked nothing like that in that area, in that time in human history. We know that, but it seems to be almost like an obsession to have this mythological figure, or a figure whom many would deem as potentially alive or real, when God himself revealed himself in flesh, in human form, he just so happened to look like a white man from Kansas, from the 60s. And like this obsession with like not changing that image. Like it has to, if God came on earth, he would have to look like one of us. That's a very interesting thing that, it's a hill that I think it's very fascinating to see. That's an interesting hill for a lot of people to like die on, when it comes to almost like functionally believing that if God was to have a color, more than likely it was going to be a white one. Just an interesting observation. Second one, the recent situation, the outpouring of anger towards those that did not show reverence and or respect to the passing of Charlie Kirk. When that's fine. Just to clarify, that's fine. But it was interesting seeing so many white conservatives specifically react as strongly as they did, while knowing that the internet exists and that people like myself, who also was alive and also on the internet, observed countless people, including Charlie Kirk himself, who would make disparaging comments and jokes about black people that had passed. The George Floyd challenge, I mean, you all can, if you're watching this means you have access to the internet. You can type it in and look at what was circulating at that time in terms of the memes, the imagery. The George Floyd challenge, for all of you that are not aware, this is where one person would lay on the ground, another person would stand above them and put their knee on the back of their neck and pose for a picture. That was seen as the George Floyd challenge. And I don't recall this energy. I don't recall this energy of this almost sanctimonious and righteous indignation that people need to respect all life, especially when life is lost. I don't think it's very interesting to see how the very group that's pointing out and shaming and going off about people not respecting the life of a human being has seemingly little to no problem with ignoring or not acknowledging what happened when conservatives or white people were the ones often doing it. I mean, as a further example to this, when you think about it, like, regardless of the agreement or likability of Barack Obama, we do remember the signs that were being shown at some of these Tea Party rallies, right? They all weren't, up to code. We do remember some of them looking like apes and monkeys with like a suit on, or like Obama with a banana in his hand. Like we remembered that, right? And that there was like this underbelly that just seemed to be able to coexist with a lot of white people around, seemingly not like shaming or trashing that. It was like at best just allowed, permitted, even if not, all of them were doing it. It was very clear that it wasn't something that like would ostracize someone immediately, when they would often be in spaces with a lot of other white people, it seemed. The obsession with not wanting to focus on the past when it's convenient, but not having that same energy when it comes to moments, events, and holidays you like, and wanting to celebrate that are often from the past. The most recent criticisms relating to Juneteenth, or really any holiday, that it seems like when white America in general likes a particular holiday, it goes without saying. It's just accepted. It's normalized, as if holidays aren't just special days that people have just decided to just commemorate or remember or signify for whatever reason. It seems interesting that, again, there seems to be somewhat of a undercurrent within some aspects, certain groups within the white community, where there seems to be almost like a staunch willingness to kind of move on from all the things in the past that we don't like or want to hear about. But when it's a reflection of a veteran in your life, or something that you're proud of, that's the things you want to hold on to and kind of remember. But when it's something for another group that is important and significant, it's not important. We need to let the past be the past. The fixation. I kind of alluded to this in one of my critiques with Charlie and the conservatives in regards to some of their argumentative talking points about this overarching fixation to frame crime and criminality within other groups as a group or culture issue, but allow for white crime and criminality to be individualized and isolated to the specific individual that committed the crime or offenses. Thus why most of you have never used the term white on white crime, even though crime exists within that very group and community. So crime exists within the black community. Therefore, we use concepts and terms like black on black crime. Crime exists within the white community. You don't use terms like white on white crime. Very, very interesting. And then lastly, in regards to reparations, the big one. And I'll just say this. When analyzing the various groups and individuals that have received it and continue to do so, whether it be the Japanese, Native American tribes, slave owners who were compensated for the slaves that they were forced to release, and even just the argument to side with and support a foreign government or country based on supposed birthright claims from thousands of years ago to justify your ongoing support and taxes and allegiance today with foreign governments, foreign nation on foreign land, and knowing that there are people even today that still have living relatives today that were living and paying taxes in an apartheid America during Jim Crow and believing that they were owed nothing when all these other groups were allowed to. Meanwhile, this group, not in the past, not presently, and not ever, should have received any form of reparatory response. Just noted this. So, I do think that if I had, stopped there, if I had stopped there and these were my only experiences with white people, my only frame of reference to white people, white culture, white community, I do wonder if this question would even need to be asked. But luckily, this hasn't been my only, experiences. For example, half the jobs and opportunities that I've received, particularly as a college student and as an adult, were given to me by white people. Several of my professional mentors are and have been for quite some time white women. Some of my closest friends from college who remained my friends after major situations and failures in my life, emotionally, psychologically, relationally, and that remained and stayed my friends even to this day, 10 plus years later, are white. And even that incident I referenced in South Philly where, racial slurs are being hurled at us, people are throwing cups and water and random stuff at us and whatnot, I was escorted. I was escorted out of that mob to my vehicle by white officers. And I appreciate that, honestly. And when I was near the Poconos, this is probably about 12, 13 years ago at this point, coming back from working at a camp up there, driving back to Philly right after a bad snowstorm, the roads were slick, and slid on a patch of black ice. It was cold, it was dark, nobody was stopping, and an older white man pulled over with his truck, tied some stuff to my car and was able to pull me out. Didn't know him, he didn't know me, but he did a really dope thing. Heck, I even think about arguably one of the worst, if not the worst moment of my life. That bridge that I had mentioned on the episode when I said that I wanted to die, as I made myself known and got down and was now walking on the bridge and approaching the police officer who saw me. She, being a white female officer, was the one to tell me, come down, get down, and just lay down. And in a moment when life was at its worst, and I seriously contemplated not wanting to be here or live anymore, it was a white female officer that just told me, whatever it is that you're going through, it's okay. And that you're going to be okay. The white female officer that in that moment told me the one thing I didn't believe. So to answer the question, based on everything that I've experienced, everything that I've witnessed, and everything that I've observed, both good and bad, do I hate white people? No. However, this is my critique, so get ready for it. I've been observing and watching all throughout the year this phenomenon of its reference to something called black fatigue. Although there may be some legitimate issues that kind of comes with this terminology and why it's being referenced in regards to how a lot of people of all races, racial backgrounds, are feeling about this whole black fatigue and some of the behaviors and issues that they're noting and seeing in society in general. I wonder if you have heard and reflected on everything that I just said, all the various negative moments, threats, encounters, and experiences I personally had with white men and women over the course of these 35 plus years of my life. And why is it that myself and many people or many others that have experienced similar, even far worse things to or from rather white people, why we've never felt the need to talk about or post something like white fatigue. What I've come to realize when thinking about questions like this and seeing the reactions and responses often by people who just happen to be white and at times will get very passionate in their reactions or responses to hearing some of the feedback or criticisms about things that particular ideologies, viewpoints, or statements that they as individuals may make, is I realize, and again, it's just a hypothesis. I'm wondering if perhaps the scariest thing is not that despite everything that I've witnessed and everything that I've observed, particularly that's negative, maybe it's not the fact that I still don't hate white people or hate white community or white culture. Perhaps the scariest thing is never knowing or being able to predict every white person, every black face in mind that you see, walk past, or encounter. Never being able to truly know whether or not they feel like me and just flat out don't hate, or the fact of whether or not they're angry, whether or not they're revengeful, bitter, or just can simply feel or think something that you won't ever know unless they decide to show or tell you. That's what I realize now, as I think is where a lot of this fear is for some people, for some white people. And if anything, I think almost it would be easier if they just knew without a shadow of a doubt that all of us, every single non-white person, every single black, foundational black American hated them, hated you. That might actually be easier than never fully being able to know person by person, neighborhood by neighborhood, whether or not we hate you, like you, love you, have the best intentions for you, or want to harm you. You don't always fully know unless we typically do or say or show something to give you an indication one way or the other. And I think that can be a little disheartening. So in regards to me as potential arguments for why it is that I don't personally hate white people, besides the many of the positives that I did experience, many of the relationships and people that I do still work with, do life with, and check in with, and, allow to see my baby and all this other stuff. I can acknowledge the declining replacement birth rate in many white populations in Western countries and state clearly, message to white people, you all need to start having kids again, quickly. No one who hates you would acknowledge this is happening or encourage you to radically quickly change what's happening to your birth rate. A person who hates the white race, white people, the white community, and white culture would prefer there being less of you, not more of you. Point number 2, I can acknowledge the flaws of DEI. how companies and organizations were incentivized to functionally ignore the recruitment, enrollment, and retention specifically of white males in various industries, and it being a distortion of the original intent and spirit of affirmative action, where many people who were non-white were not even permitted to be able to get access to many of the positions at all. I definitely think it's a perversion and is a far extreme example of what I think the original affirmative action was put in place to do. Now, although white women were the biggest beneficiaries of DEI, and black men and black women were constantly seen and displayed as the face and primary benefactors of it, no one, again, who hates white people, white culture, and the white community would have acknowledged any inconvenience or burden, hurdle, or systemic obstacle that directly or indirectly impacts the white community today, which in this instance, i.e. DEI, was heavily impacting white males. No one who hates white people, doesn't want the best for white people, would put that out loud or state that, although it's there. Now, I can acknowledge that open borders that are being demanded in all of the countries that are westernized and majority white, there's a lack of demanding to open up the borders in all these other countries that happen to also be non-white majority countries. Again, no one who hates white people would acknowledge that this is specifically and intentionally being pushed and happening by globalists and their politician puppet class. In fact, I think those that did hate white people and did hate white people enough to no longer like the idea of them being the majority in any particular place or region, I think those that hate white people would actually love open borders in a modern society that attempts to recognize nation states and their borders. I think that those who actually hate white people would want the open borders and want the white population to not continue to have children, to grow, to reproduce, to always be shafted when it came to economic jobs and opportunities, as well as open borders. I think all of those policies in varying degrees are anti-white. I can acknowledge that. And I'm agreeing that that isn't a good thing and that things need to change as a result of that. And that many of my personal stances and views and reflections are to the betterment of white people in the white community and the white race. Kind of hard to think that way, feel that way, and stand on those things, especially when they're not often popular, even amongst my own people. And simultaneously also hate that same group that I'm advocating for. And no one that has repeatedly seen, experienced, and been called the things I have by some white people that were, I would argue, in those moments, pretty functionally horrible human beings, and yet still choose to show, to hire, to live around and do life with white people. I would venture that we should probably not place people like that in the category or camp of hating white people, unless you think and believe that the group you identify with, were born into, and best reflects your current values, is somehow perfect despite being man-made. Because if your unwillingness to seek out those issues and areas of weakness, hypocrisy, and flaws, if you refuse to seek those things out in whichever group that you're attributed to, if you're refusing to do those things and look for those things, including the inconsistency, it's going to leave you vulnerable to confirmation bias, being triggered, lacking emotional regulation when hearing things that you don't like about whatever groups that you were born into or identify with. And you're definitely going to lose objectivity when being exposed to and made aware of issues within your own group. So the instant belief that someone might have a phobia or hatred towards someone because they disagree or have another view or critique of something many claim is often a left-wing tactic. Be careful when you claim every white person that has something to point out that's happening within the white community, within your private conversations, and off of social media is now, when they're stating something that's not flattering, that is critical, don't instantly assume it's because they're all just self-hating white people. And I would even add, be mindful to not assume that every non-white person that has a critique or has something to say that's not flattering about a general observation that they're seeing is doing so because they also hate white people. Because isn't that the same tactic that we referenced from the beginning, that when I say something about women that I think is problematic in their interactions with men or in society, or how they're going about raising children in certain environments, if that's a critique, that doesn't mean that I now hate women. If I critique things that I'm seeing that's happening in the Black community in general, or specifically, or individually, doesn't mean that I hate Black people. If I'm critiquing the Democrats, doesn't mean that I hate all Democrats, or that I hate my Democrat or liberal neighbor or friend or family member. So if someone has something to say about the white community, or a white person, or white people, or the culture, or the community, it doesn't instantly automatically mean, therefore, they must hate white people. Because again, if we're going to be consistent, intellectually consistent, if one of the big things that were huge supporters of Charlie Kirk was stating is he was just telling the truth how he saw it about Black people, about Muslims, about Arabs, etc. And that he wasn't being led by hate, then perhaps Jeff, who's articulating what he honestly believes to be true and can point to and can show and reference why it is that he's come to those conclusions. If the topic of discussion just happens to be a white person or white people or the white community or you name it, just like in all those other areas with all those other groups, doesn't mean I instantly automatically hate them. So why is it that when someone says something about a white person or the white community or you name it, that must mean they therefore hate white people? Obviously, that's not automatically something that just has to be assumed. So the only ways you can consistently conclude that is the case, that every person, if they're white and they say something about the white community, you don't like it, or if they're non-white and they say something about the white community or group and you don't like it, the only way that you can consistently conclude that this is the case is if you operate with the premise that the white community and white people are the only community and only people that do everything right and never anything wrong. But if you think they have their issues like every other group, then you will either start using terms like white on white crime and seeing Charlie Kirk's shooter as a reflection of white culture. And you're going to, or you're going to stop doing that when it comes to how you think and talk about everyone else. I'm going to say that part again just to make sure that we're clear as I wrap up this video. If you think that the white community in America specifically, or around the globe, if you think that the white people and white culture and the white communities have their own set of unique issues and challenges within their group, as you would believe any and every other group does as well, then you will either have to start, if you're going to be consistent, using terms like white on white crime to describe white criminality, and seeing Charlie Kirk's shooter as a reflection, an example of white culture. If you are not and have not been doing that for those two examples, but you have been doing that with other groups, especially, in my case, the Black community, either start being consistent with how you talk and frame and reference bad or evil or criminal things happening in the white community and describe it in the same exact way. But if you feel weird with taking a shooter, person that shot Charlie Kirk, and saying, well, He's a representation of the white community, and not Charlie Kirk. The guy who shot him is the representation of the white community. And that's an example of white on white crime. Either you need to start talking that way if you're going to be more consistent, or you need to stop talking that way about everybody else that's not white. It's a really, really big issue. Critique that myself and many others who have observed and seen, from pundits to politicians to commentators, podcasters, and even just everyday people. It's still shocking that how many of you haven't realized how interestingly racist it is to have one standard of how it is you choose to categorize, critique, fixate, and obsess for white people, and then an entirely different way of framing, grouping, categorizing, obsessing, and generalizing everyone else that's not white. So no, I don't hate white people, white culture, or even the white community. I just view them the same way I would everyone else. And I don't make it a habit to only isolate the bad. And the leading statistics of white men, which I believe is about 28 to 30% of the population, where they are often overrepresented with their unique issues relating to crimes. I think some examples would be like kidnapping and pedos and mass shooters and unsolved murders and whatnot. Stuff like that. I don't pathologize and generalize the criminal elements of what a small percentage of white men are doing and stating and seeing that as a reflection on all white people and white culture. And you want to know why it is that I don't do that? Why I don't take the white mass murderer and say this is a reflection of all white people, or the shooter of Charlie Kirk and say this is a reflection of all white people and all white culture? This is a reflection of what it means currently to be white in America. The reason why I don't do that, and the reason why I don't walk around talking about white on white crime and everything that's evil and wrong that when a white person does it, this is a reflection of the entire group. The reason why I don't do that is because I don't hate white people. My hope is that we stop finding it acceptable to do that to everyone else. Let me know your thoughts. I'm sure that was a lot, and we'll see where we go from here. So my next episode is going to be the truth about Barack Obama. And I hope y'all enjoyed this. I hope y'all got something from it. I hope that you all don't walk away with thinking I definitely do hate white people. And I hope people on the other end don't feel like I've kind of sucked up to try to make white people love me. I'm just in a space and place where I'm going to be me. I'm going to try to respect and value truth above being liked, loved. And my hope is that those of you that maybe haven't thought about some of these things will internalize it and see if there's anything that needs to adjust with how you talk, with how you reference, with how you communicate, and just how you even judge other ethnic groups, racial groups, people. And those of you who maybe do hate white people, I would strongly, strongly consider you to reevaluate that the very thing that you hate and don't like, that you feel white supremacists do, neo-Nazis do, and those that outwardly or even directly or indirectly do when it comes to judging us for things that we haven't even done to earn that negative judgment on. There's white people like that too. And I think my biggest takeaway, having gone to the schools I've gone to, having been on the sports teams that I have, the friends that I've had, the experiences that I've had, good and bad, is that it's a mixed bag within every group. There's white people who just want to make enough money to go on vacation once or twice a year, be able to spend time with their families, want to be in safe areas. They really don't wake up every day and be like, how can I make a black person's life worse? Or You know, I wonder what Black people are thinking today. Like, I think that a lot of I think a lot of white people just are trying to live their lives as best they can. And I hope they who are watching this will be open to the possibility that many of the same groups that they may not know or be as close to or may not hang out with enough will realize that the overwhelming majority of people in my community and in other communities that happen to be non-white, most of us feel the exact same way. Yeah, there's always going to be some Black people that hate anybody that's not Black and believe in Black supremacy, just like there's going to be some white people that feel and think the same way. My experience, what I've witnessed, what I've observed, what I've researched, I think the overwhelming majority of white people, the overwhelming majority of Black, Hispanic, Asian, etc., are just people just trying to figure out and survive in this thing called capitalism, life, taxes, the cost of living. We're just all figuring it out. In reality, I think it's those who benefit the most from division that are the ones that are often stoking the division. So yeah, I've put out some interesting thoughts. Would love to hear your feedback, responses. Remember what I said before, as long as it's respectful. This space is a place where people can disagree with me. That's why there's tons and tons of comments on quite a few of these episodes and clips where people disagree with me, and they're going to sit there and stay there indefinitely, as long as you're not crossing the line, like in terms of disrespect. But yeah, so to answer my question, finally, do I hate white people? No. And my hope is the standard that I hold and the examples that I gave for why it is that I don't, including not feeling the need to constantly generalize white people based off of the actions of a few, and still being able to see them as individuals and see the best out of those who I've never met and never experienced and never heard from. I will hope that you all are able to do the same with all of us, regardless of whether we align with you politically, align with you religiously, and whether we look like you, dress like you, or sound like you. We're still human at the end of the day. Thank y'all for your time. Until next time, God sign out. Peace.